Hi, ladies. I'm just started the recording, so I can get going on what I wanted to share on the sugar addiction, overcoming it, and we're going to really dig in. Yeah, I think you're really going to like this one. So I'm going to go through. It's a PowerPoint that I've created when I was teaching another class at the doctor's office. So I'm going to share that with you and go over it. And then at the end, if we have any questions, we'll dive in then. All right. And I'm trying to share my screen here. Here it is. Okay. So there, hopefully you are, let's see. I will, no. Okay. There we go. Can you guys see my screen? Can you let me know? Can somebody say yes? Because I can't see the notes anymore. Do you guys see that blood sugar roller coaster on there? Here. Maybe, did I mute you? Feel free to unmute yourself.
I can see it, Sue.
Okay, thank you so much. Is that all you're seeing then? Is that and then a little picture of me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. That's what I was hoping it would work out. I'm still learning this. I apologize. Okay, so I'm just going to dive right in and share with you guys what I have. We're looking at here the blood sugar roller coaster. And what we want to do is avoid this blood sugar roller coaster because as you can see, like say for an example here, you start the day off with a carbohydrate rich breakfast and that sets the tone for the day. So a high sugar, high grain breakfast right out of the gate gives you this big blood sugar spike. And then it comes the drop and the hunger and that low feeling. And then if you grab another high carb snack to bounce back, a donut, a muffin, a granola bar, you can see how this cycle just continues basically throughout the day of spikes and lows and spikes and lows. And it's interesting, a lot of times people say that they struggle with low blood sugar, but most of the time what they're actually struggling with is the low after high blood sugar. So the basically your first meal is so important because it sets the tone for the day, and having balanced blood sugar levels all day means that you're going to feel better. You're going to have controlled energy levels, balanced moods, less cravings, less crashes, less headaches, and you're not going to be continually chasing hunger. You're going to keep that blood sugar more stable and in that green zone by eating proteins and fats. That's going to help you feel satiated, feel so much better, and keep you from developing metabolic syndrome. So, starting your day well will help you if you are struggling with sugar and grain addiction, because it's going to right away start you off just feeling more balanced and not feeling it's in those dips that sugar addiction really kicks in, that we really want those carbs and stuff. So let's talk now about carbohydrate addiction. So carbohydrate addiction, when the purpose of eating shifts from a nutrient supply to endorphin relief, it leads to excess carbohydrate consumption and ultimately harms our bodies, including our minds and our peace. Carb addiction is about temporary emotional happiness, all right? Unfortunately, carbohydrates do not satisfy our hunger. So when I'm saying carbohydrates, I'm literally referring to sugars and grains, okay? And I'm not talking about eating too many vegetables that have carbs. I'm not, going there. We're unless you're like loading up on potatoes or something really high carb. But we're talking the sugars, the added sugars, the rices, the pastas, and the grains and the breads. Okay. So that's when I say carbohydrates, that's what we're referring to. This is so true. Carbohydrates do not satisfy hunger. They stimulate it, okay? Foods today are basically considered designer foods. They were designed to get us addicted because when we're addicted, we buy more food. We stop at the drive-thru more often. Those businesses then grow and keeps us coming back. And that's the nature of addiction, is they want us to keep coming back. So they're making this food amazing for us. And at the grocery store, the term bliss point was coined by a US marketer researcher, and he is known for his work in creating soft drinks and pasta sauces. And it refers to that point at which sugar, fat, and salt are blended to just this delicious perfection known as the bliss point. And so really they've been marketing these things to us for so long and wanting us to become addicted because it really helps their bottom line ultimately. So a bliss point also is not too much fat or too much sugar, but it's just that perfect point that makes us, where just like the potato chip says, you can't stop, you can't eat just one of them. That's the point they want us to get to. He also coined the phrase mouthfeel, this researcher, which is a term used to describe the smoothness of ice cream and that perfect crunch of a chip that will keep you eating more and more. The food industry wants to sell us as much as possible, so they make it taste as good as they possibly can. So we as consumers play a role, and we need to educate ourselves, and we need to become actively aware of the ingredients that go into the foods we eat. Okay, so when we think about this, though, the fact that they have created this, we have to realize some of this is not our fault. Like, they literally created stuff that makes us desperately want more of it. All right, so that's part of what's happening here. But then we have to take a look at our options and our choices, and what does that look like? And I posted this in the Awaken Your Moxie group today. Abstainer versus moderator, and you need to understand what is going to work best for you. All this plays into this addiction and overcoming this addiction. Okay, so abstainers feel that abstinence brings them freedom. Removing all the carbs or specific food brings freedom because they no longer are tormented by the decision-making process with food. They don't have to think about it. They've just decided no sugar or no soda or no chips or whatever it is. And an abstainer finds it easier to give up something entirely rather than moderate it. They don't want to make constant decisions about what to eat or how much, and they have peace of mind because they've already chosen they're just not having any. So they don't have to make that. No more constant decision making. Should I eat this? Should I eat that? What about a little of this or a little of that? Their mind gets a break from all those food thoughts when they're abstainers. And studies show that 100% abstinence is actually easier to follow than 99%, which, when you think about it, makes sense. They also benefit from, abstainers also benefit from not sabotaging at the end of the day, because their brain is exhausted from making so many decisions all day that they just like, I can't take it. I'm just going to eat it all. Basically, an abstainer's mind tends to be more at rest. Okay. Whereas moderation, a moderator feels that moderation is the key to their success, because for them, complete abstinence makes them miserable. And this is for those that have anxiety about the thought of never having anything again. And moderators feel trapped by abstaining. Moderators are good at portion control. Moderators need options and variety. Moderators tend to stay resolved and focused all day and into the evening. So they just stay much more focused. This is not me, but I would ask, which are you? Only you can decide which side you are on. Now, the point here too is that there may be certain foods that you moderate and others that you abstain. This is your unique journey, okay? Personally, I think of myself as an abstainer every day. So daily, I think I'm abstaining, but I think of myself as a moderator over the rest of my life. And this keeps me from that fear thought of, well, I'll never have such and such again, because I just think to myself, I'm just choosing not to have it today, but I could change my mind another day. And for me, that is very freeing, because then I just feel more relaxed in that, okay, today I'm abstaining. I don't know if I will forever, but that's what I'm doing today. So Let's look at we're really going to get into the nitty gritty here, and I love this part. Let's look at some things. Let's look at water versus alcohol. Let's think about water. Water is necessary for human survival. It's triggered by thirst. Water is hard to overdrink. Water is essential. It stimulates the satiety center of our brain. When we drink a lot of water, we feel it and we stop. It doesn't stimulate the reward center of our brain. Now, alcohol, on the other hand, alcohol is not necessary for human survival. And it's often triggered by an emotional need, which could just be wanting to connect with others. It is a powerful incentive, however, to have excess and to have too much. We don't get that center of our brain turning off, telling us you had enough, like we do if we drink a lot of water. And then if we have too much, that excess can cause us harm because it stimulates the endorphin or the reward center of the brain. We want to keep drinking a lot of times. Again, moderate or abstain, that's up to you. But these are just two things to look at: how water is necessary for human survival, alcohol is not, okay? And we're gonna compare this to food in a minute, but I just want you to sit on this and think about it while I read you a quote from Dr. Robert Cywes, one of my favorite people, and that's Cywes is how you spell his last name. And if someone can write that in the chat, that would be awesome. And then we'll have that recorded and kept there. But Dr. Robert Cywes, Cywes, he talks a lot about carbohydrate addiction. And I've taken several of his classes, his courses. This is all a quote from him. He says, "We don't drink alcohol to manage our thirst. We drink alcohol to help manage our emotional needs. We all have emotional needs: stress, depression, anxiety, anger, fear, sadness, boredom, pleasure. And from time to time, at the end of a rough day, a glass of wine, a beer, a cocktail, or something is a very effective way to just dissipate that emotional distress. However, when you start to use alcohol more and more, and not just to dissipate or relax for an evening and stop, but you start using it to numb and to soothe and to get rid of those stressful feelings, over time, that excessive relationship causes harm. And if you ignore the harm to continue the relationship with it, you've lost control of the relationship and you could become an alcoholic. The problem for an alcoholic is the relationship where they abuse the alcohol and develop over time a dysfunctional emotional management system. Okay, I want that to sink in. So over time, the problem with alcohol is the relationship when we overuse it and we develop a dysfunctional emotional management system. Alcohol puts out the emotional fires and represses issues instead of dealing with the issues. It's a dysfunctional emotional management system without an effective way to connect with the actual issues. Okay, so that's how he explained it in our class. And I just thought it was so good. I wanted to share that exactly with you. But now let's look at it in regards to the foods that we eat. Okay, food is necessary for survival. It's filled with protein, fat, vitamins, minerals, electrolytes, fiber, and nutrients. Real food is hard to overeat. Eating food is triggered by hunger, a message in our brain. It keeps our blood sugar balanced and leads to a healthy body. If we eat food, our blood sugar will not spike and drop if we are eating nutritious food. It stimulates that center of our brain also, so we know when we're full. Now, carbohydrates, on the other hand, are not necessary for survival because they're not food. They're triggered by an emotional need. Remember, food is what sustains us, food is what satiates us, and food is what nourishes us. But these carbohydrates are triggered by an emotional need. They have a powerful incentive to lead us to excess and to overeat. All right. Those excess carbs cause harm in our body through the insulin spikes that lead to insulin resistance, which is a trigger for inflammation in our body. And inflammation is the foundation of all other diseases. So the carbs reward our endorphin center. They stimulate the reward center of our brain. And like I said, that leads to blood sugar spikes, crashes, and eventually sickness. So we have to separate our vital nutrition from our endorphin creating substances. So we have to separate that there is food and there is carbohydrates. One nourishes and one gives us endorphins and gives us dopamine. Carbohydrates are not a food. They are a drug, really just like alcohol in a lot of ways. All sugars and starches are consumed for pleasure and for the endorphin high because they are not nutritious. It is clearly for a feel good, okay? We get pleasure from carbohydrates, so we crave them and we chase that feeling. Now, this is really, really key. Carbohydrates aren't the problem. Our relationship with them is the problem. Alcohol isn't the problem. It's our relationship to it that's a problem. Hunger is different for a person who uses food for an endorphin high or comfort, okay? So it's a different kind of a hunger when we're using it for comfort. We have to get curious. We have to ask, are we hungry in our body or are we hungry in our brain? Are we needing nutrition or an endorphin release, also known as a hit of dopamine? Typically, these are just an interesting statistic. Someone who is obese consumes 80% of their intake as carbohydrates, and they eat about 15 times a day on average. That sounds like a crazy amount until you start keeping track of how many times you grab something and put it in your mouth. And it's shocking. But as humans, we were actually created to eat satiating meals 1, 2, maybe 3 times a day at most. And snacks are almost always an emotional management decision and not a nutritional one. And this is why I tell people, part of this is don't let yourself get hungry. Eat good, nutritious food, lots of proteins and healthy fats for your meals. So you're not feeling that hunger in between. Because I'll tell you what, is it fascinating after a while, you realize you really aren't hungry and you stop yourself and go, wait a minute, what am I really wanting right now? Do I want food? Is my stomach really hungry? Or am I bored? Am I lonely? Am I sad? Am I frustrated? Okay. A healthy person can have all kinds of things they leaned into for occasional endorphin releases: wine, carbohydrates, exercise, shopping, cleaning, gardening, whatever. But if carbohydrates are your drug of choice, you will primarily select food and drink for its pleasure value rather than its nutritional value. And it's an unhealthy relationship that leads to harm in our body. And that is one of the things about addiction that makes something an addiction, is that you keep doing it even though you know it's harming you. That's part of what addiction is. When it leads to harm and we continue it anyways, like I just said, it becomes an addiction. It's our emotional management systems that are out of whack. All right. But you, my dear, our bodies were created by God in such a way that we eat food and we get full. He created us that way. The food comes in, the blood sugar levels start going up, the pancreas secretes insulin to bring them back down, to take all of that glucose and the food that we've just put in our blood system and put it into our cells to work for us. And then it brings our glucose levels to back down. So we get kind of like if we watch our blood sugar, and I do a CGM monitor myself, so I see it just kind of little hills here and there when I'm doing really good. And if I have something that has a lot of carbohydrates in it, it's going to spike my blood sugar and I'm going to see it on there. But our body was created in a way that it just balances out when we're actually eating nutritious food that is nourishing our body. And then we get full and we stop eating. And this is called homeostasis. It's not that roller coaster that we saw earlier. Again, notice it says our bodies were created by God in such a way that when we eat food, we get full. So much of what's available to us today is not food. It's not meant for consumption. It's not what God created us to consume. And I just, by grace, it puts up with a lot, and the body constantly wants to heal and take care of itself. So it's constantly trying to protect you and your liver and all of the things that get affected by the high carbohydrate diets that we have and that we eat. So food is essential. Carbohydrates are not. When we eat those sugars and starches that are not essential, there's no feedback or control loop to make us feel full and bring us into homeostasis. We can just keep eating that basket of chips. We can eat the whole thing and then we can have dessert. But if that was steak that we were eating at the same amount, we could never, because our body would tell us. But because again, what we're putting in us isn't food, our body's not recognizing that we're full. So it's not even telling us we're full, okay? Again, what I talked about earlier, addiction. An alcoholic says, I need a drink. A carboholic says, I'm hungry. Alcoholism is as much about a hydration problem as carbohydrate addiction is a nutritional problem. Let's think about that again. I'm going to say it again. Alcoholism is as much a hydration problem as carbohydrate addiction is a nutrition problem. Carbohydrates do not fill us with nutrition. Alcohol does not fill us with hydration. We don't drink alcohol for the hydration, and we don't eat carbs for the nutrition. We may eat carbs for the energy and the way that it makes us feel, but again, it's not a sustaining form of nutrition. Let me just say here, if you are someone who works out heavily, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. Okay, so carbohydrates may fit into what you're doing more. So I don't, I'm talking to, I think, most people who are more like me, who are living, an average day, getting some exercise, moving around, but not high intensity training. That's a whole nother ballgame when it comes to carbohydrates. And I'm not even getting into that right now. But back to this, the definition of addiction by Dr. Robert Sivas: chronic excessive use of an instant gratifying endorphin chronic excessive use of an instant gratifying endorphin activating substance or behavior to the point of harm, while ignoring and distorting the reality of the harm to validate and justify the tension relieving high and continue the relationship with carbohydrates. So instant gratification, bringing us to the point of harm and not paying attention to that harm is addiction. And we do it to relieve tension, and we continue a relationship with it. This is the definition of addiction. Addiction occurs when the harm is ignored and the behavior is continued. It is defined by a loss of control over the relationship. Addicts develop an incredibly sophisticated mechanism of minimizing, justifying, trivializing, rationalizing, and denying the problem to protect themselves from recognizing the harm and allowing themselves to continue the behavior despite harmful consequences. Okay. Now we're going to jump into the addiction cycle real quick here. I told you, this is like This is like school. But to me, knowledge is power. You have got to understand this issue before you can truly deal with it. Okay. Here's the addiction cycle. I created this wheel because I'm like, we have got to understand this is what it is. It starts with that emotional trigger. Okay. The addiction cycle starts with that triggering event that in turn triggers emotions or feelings often associated with stress, pain, anger, trauma, boredom, loneliness. We all have different triggers. The emotional trigger ignites a desire to squelch or comfort that uncomfortable feeling that rises up in us. And we feel a need to shut down those negative emotions. The way for an addict to subdue the emotion or feeling is to act out of their drug of choice. This applies to all addicts across the board. This could be alcohol, sex, drugs, processed food, gambling, shopping, you name it, all kinds of vices. But that triggering event is going to lead you to start craving so that you can shut down those negative emotions. Again, like I said, though, this could be boredom. If it is, get curious. Why is boredom a trigger for you that causes you to need comfort? What belief is attached to the boredom that makes you need to numb that sense of boredom? These are questions for you to get really curious about and ask yourself. The next step is cravings. Cravings can be described as an overwhelming feeling or desire. We all know what a craving is, right? And it's to soothe that pain and diminish the feelings that were triggered by whatever it was that triggered us. Stress hormones directly affect the reward chemical dopamine. In this time of stress, the chemical responses in the body are affecting our behavior. Okay. An addict will seek out that drug of choice, which they believe will alleviate the cravings. They're like, I have this craving. Now I have to get it so I can stop feeling this craving. As the craving sensations increase, addicts will eventually return to ritual behaviors, which is the next step. Ritual behaviors can be described as activities, thoughts, ideas that the addict engages in as part of their addiction. Okay. Once ritual behavior has started, it is hard for most addicts to turn away at this point. In a sense, the ritual behavior can be seen as a preparation leading to using, to eating, or to acting out whatever it is. For example, an alcoholic may store up on alcohol several days before binging. A carb addict will store up and maybe plan ahead for their treat. The longer an addict is engaged in this ritual behavior, the preparation time, the harder it can be to stop the cycle. All right. Then comes using. Ultimately, we act out on that addiction, which leads then right into feelings of guilt and shame. And guilt and shame, once we use, once we eat, or whatever it is that is our addiction, we have immediate feelings of guilt, which are followed by shame. What's the difference? Guilt tells us you failed, you blew it. Shame tells us you didn't just fail, you are a failure. Shame makes it part of our identity. Shame is a much deeper and more painful emotion. Guilt grabs the shovel and shame digs the hole. And this cycle, then these feelings of guilt, what happens? They become the next triggering event. And then they move us into a cycle of craving and ritual behavior and using and circling back to guilt. And most addictive behavior follows this cycle. Okay. So we're going to end on this slide. Addiction itself is not the problem. It's an attempt to solve a problem. The first question I want you to ask yourself is, what problem am I trying to solve? What is it? All right. And if the triggers are emotional and not physical hunger, we have to deal with the emotional side of eating. Okay. What is that? I can't answer that. Now, if we were into a coaching session, we would be really back and forth on this and trying to unpack some of this. And I'm willing to do that with you guys. You just let me know. But what is the problem you're trying to solve? What am I feeling that I'm trying to numb? What am I stopping? And then how do we manage the emotional side of eating? Essentially, this comes down to how we regulate or control the emotions that trigger the cravings. Okay, listen to that again. Essentially, managing this comes down to how we regulate or control the emotions that trigger our cravings. Because remember, it's not the food that's the problem, it's our relationship to the food. So, what is that relationship? What is keeping that going? What is it that's drawing us to continue it and to want more? And this is some deep soul searching. And I think it's just part of this issue because we've got that addiction as far as our food and our and that bliss point and the taste and the mouthfeel and all that which we love. But again, it's giving us something that's filling an emotional void. So that's a lot. I realize that. And what I want you to take away from this is, okay, where do I go with this now? How do I start to, I want you to start getting really curious when you feel hunger. And when, like I have situations where I just had one last week where I got a phone call from someone and I shouldn't say right away, but a half hour later, I find myself, pillaging through the kitchen. And I'm like, whoa, 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 what am I doing? Why am I doing this right now? I'm not hungry. I know my stomach is not hungry. And then I realized I'm trying to numb. I don't like the way that phone call made me feel. It's just a difficult relationship. And I was with a family member and I was like, oh, I was wanting to numb. And so that's what I was doing. So get curious, get thinking about it. I am going to stop the recording now and then we can chat if you ladies want to chat that are in here. But thank you so much to everybody. Unless, let me look real quick. Is there a question? Okay, I'm just going to stop. But thank you all and keep checking out the group for what's coming.